Dylan's daughter pressed play. She heard her father's voice. But this wasn't the voice she knew. This was broken, desperate, trying to explain. And hearing it once was enough. The tape had been hidden for 40 years. Not lost. Not forgotten. Hidden. Deliberately. In a cardboard box at the back of a storage unit in Malibu, beneath tour posters from the 70s and unopened fan mail and contracts from record deals that made Bob Dylan wealthy but never comfortable. Maria Dylan found it in the spring of 2018. She was 53 years old, helping to organize her father's archives for a museum retrospective. Endless boxes. Endless memories that belonged to a man who rarely spoke about his past because the past was something that followed you no matter how far you walked. The box wasn't labeled. Just brown cardboard, sealed with packing tape that had yellowed and cracked. When Maria opened it, she found the reel-to-reel recorder inside. A Sony TC510-2, late 1970s model. The kind Dylan used in hotel rooms when he didn't want studio engineers hearing his rough ideas. There was a tape already threaded on the reels. No label. No date. No title. Just a piece of masking tape on the recorder itself with 4 words in Dylan's handwriting. Don't. Just don't. Maria should have stopped there. Should have respected the warning. Should have closed the box and moved on to the next archive container. But she was her father's daughter. And curiosity, the same curiosity that made Bob Dylan write songs that asked questions nobody else dared to ask, ran in the family. She carried the recorder to a quiet room. Plugged it in. The machine hummed to life with that familiar analog warmth, the reels trembling slightly, waiting. She pressed play. Static first. Then breathing. Then her father's voice, younger than she remembered it, maybe 40 years old, maybe less. And he was crying. Dylan didn't explain himself. He never did. To understand what Maria heard on that tape, you need to understand what happened in December 1978. Bob Dylan was 57 years old, standing in the middle of his second divorce, his third religious crisis, and his 20th year of being called the voice of a generation, a title he never asked for and spent 2 decades trying to escape. He was exhausted. Not the physical kind of tired that sleep fixes. The existential kind. The kind that comes from spending 20 years being everything to everyone except yourself. He'd released Street Legal that year. Critics hated it. Fans were confused. Dylan didn't care. He was already somewhere else mentally, already walking away from folk music and protest songs and all the expectations people had pinned to him like accusations. He'd also started attending Bible study classes in Los Angeles. Quietly. Without publicity. Because something in him was breaking and he didn't know how else to fix it except to look for something bigger than folk music and bigger than fame and bigger than Bob Dylan. In December 1978, Dylan played a small club in Santa Monica. Not advertised. Maybe 200 people. He played new songs. Christian songs. Songs about faith and doubt, and trying to find solid ground when everything you'd built your life on turned out to be sand. The audience was confused. Some walked out. Others stayed out of loyalty but didn't understand what they were witnessing. After the show, a man approached Dylan backstage. His name was Thomas Garrett. He was 63 years old. Thin. Gray. Wearing a coat too big for his frame. He had the look of someone who'd been sick for a long time and had made peace with it. "Mr. Dylan," Thomas said, his voice quiet but steady, "I need to tell you something. And I need you to just listen. Don't say anything. Just listen." Dylan almost said no. He almost had his manager remove the man. But something about Thomas's face, the calmness in it, the absence of expectation, made Dylan nod instead. "I was at Newport," Thomas said. 1965, when you went electric. I was in the crowd. I booed you." Dylan's expression didn't change. He'd heard this story 1,000 times. People apologizing for rejecting him when he dared to change. It was old news. "I booed you," Thomas continued, Because I thought you'd betrayed everything you stood for. I thought you'd sold out. I thought folk music was sacred and you'd turned it into noise. He paused, his hands trembling slightly. I was wrong. Not about the music. I still don't like that album. But I was wrong about you. Because what I didn't understand then, what took me 40 years to understand, is that you weren't trying to save the world. You were trying to save yourself. Dylan's jaw tightened. He still hadn't spoken. I have cancer, Thomas said simply. Stage 4. 3 months, maybe less. And I've spent the last year thinking about the things I got wrong. The judgments I made. The people I hurt by expecting them to be what I needed instead of who they were. He looked directly at Dylan. You don't know me anything. You don't know anyone anything. But I wanted you to know that I finally understand. You were never the voice of a generation. You were just a man trying to breathe under the weight of everyone's expectations. And I'm sorry I added to that weight. Thomas extended his hand. Dylan shook it. The older man turned and walked out of the dressing room, back into the Santa Monica night, and Bob Dylan never saw him again. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most important part of this story is still unfolding. Dylan stood alone in that dressing room for 20 minutes after Thomas left. Not moving. Not speaking. Just standing in the fluorescent light backstage, staring at nothing. Then he went back to his hotel room. He set up his reel-to-reel recorder. And he did something he'd never done before and would never do again. He tried to explain himself. Not to the public. Not to critics. Not even to the man who just walked out. But to himself. To the part of him that had spent 20 years wondering if he'd done anything right, or if he'd just been running from one mistake to the next. He pressed record. I don't know why I'm doing this, Dylan's voice said on the tape, rough and uncertain. I don't know who's supposed to hear it. Maybe nobody. Maybe that's better. A pause. Breathing. That man tonight. Thomas. He said I was trying to save myself. And he's right. That's all I've ever been doing. But nobody wants to hear that. They want to believe I had answers. They want to believe the songs meant something bigger than one confused kid from Minnesota trying to figure out why the world felt wrong. Another pause. Longer this time. I never had answers. I just had questions that sounded like answers because I sang them with conviction. And now I'm 57 and I still don't know anything except that I've spent my whole life running from the person everyone thought I was. The tape continued. 23 minutes total. Dylan talking about Newport. About going electric. About the motorcycle accident. About Christianity. About his children. About the burden of being Bob Dylan when all he'd ever wanted was to write songs in peace. And then, at the end, something broke in his voice. If I could go back. If I could tell that 24-year-old kid at Newport one thing. I'd tell him, don't carry it. Don't carry what they put on you. Let it fall. Walk away. Because the weight will kill you slower than any disease. It'll kill you while you're still alive. Silence. But I can't go back. So I'm just here. Trying to figure out how to put it down before it buries me. The tape ended. Dylan never listened to it. Never transcribed it. Never showed it to anyone. He wrote, don't. Just don't. On the recorder and put it in a box and hid it where nobody would find it because some confessions are too raw to survive daylight. Away from the spotlight, Dylan made a choice no one expected. Maria sat in the quiet room, staring at the tape recorder. The reels had stopped turning. The tape had ended. But she could still hear her father's voice, that broken, desperate voice she'd never heard in real life. She reached for the rewind button. Her finger hovered over it. She could listen again. She could transcribe it. She could share it with her siblings. With biographers. With the museum. It was historical. It was important. It was Bob Dylan at his most vulnerable, finally explaining the things he never explained publicly. Her hand moved to the stop button instead. She pressed it. ejected the tape, held it in her hands. What followed stayed with everyone who witnessed it, long after the sound faded. Maria didn't destroy the tape. That felt wrong somehow. Like erasing evidence that her father had been human. But she didn't listen to it again either. She put it back in the box. Wrote a note. Respect his wishes. This stays sealed. And she placed it in a private archive with instructions that it should never be released. Not while Dylan was alive. Not after he died. Not ever. He spent his whole life, Maria said later to a close friend, carrying what other people put on him. And that tape, that's him trying to put it down. If I shared it, I'd just be putting it back on his shoulders. Even after he's gone. 6 months later, Maria visited her father. They sat on his porch in Malibu, looking at the ocean. Dylan was older now. Quieter. Still writing songs but no longer carrying the weight of being Bob Dylan. I found something of yours, Maria said carefully. In storage. A tape from 1978. Dylan's face didn't change, but his hands tightened on his coffee mug. And? He asked, his voice neutral. And I put it back. Where you left it. Dylan looked at her for a long moment. Then something in his expression softened. A look Maria had only seen a few times in her life. Relief mixed with gratitude mixed with something deeper. Thank you, he said quietly. They didn't speak about it again. But 2 weeks later, a package arrived at Maria's house. Inside was a harmonica. One Dylan had used during the freewheelin' sessions. No note. No explanation. But Maria understood. It was her father's way of saying what he couldn't say out loud. Some burdens aren't meant to be shared. Some confessions are meant to stay buried. And the greatest gift you can give someone is letting them keep their privacy intact. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. The tape still exists. In a sealed box. In a private archive. With instructions that it should never be opened. Maria Dylan is 60 years old now. She's never told anyone exactly what's on that tape. Not the full contents. Not the specific confessions. My father spent his life, she said once in a rare interview, being everything except himself. That tape is the one place where he got to just be broken and confused and human. And I'm not taking that away from him. Bob Dylan never asked her what she did with the tape. He trusted her. And she honored that trust by doing what he'd asked 40 years earlier. Don't. Just don't. Some stories aren't meant to be shared. Some voices are meant to stay private. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let the past stay buried, not because it doesn't matter, but because it matters too much. The tape remains sealed. The voice unheard. The confession unshared. And Bob Dylan, somewhere, is still writing songs. Still asking questions. Still walking away from the weight others try to place on his shoulders. Years later, a journalist asked Maria what she thought her father would want people to know about him. She thought for a long time before answering. I think he'd want people to know that he never had the answers they thought he had. That every song was just him trying to figure things out, same as everyone else. And that the bravest thing he ever did wasn't going electric at Newport, or converting to Christianity, or winning the Nobel Prize. It was admitting, even if only to himself on a tape nobody would hear, that he didn't know what he was doing. That he was just as lost as the people who looked to him for direction. She paused, choosing her words carefully. That tape taught me something about my father I'd never fully understood before. He wasn't trying to be mysterious or difficult or distant. He was trying to survive. And survival, for him, meant keeping some part of himself sealed away where expectation couldn't reach it. The harmonica he sent her sits on her mantel now. She's never played it. She doesn't need to. It says everything that needs to be said about privacy, trust, and the distance between who we are and who the world needs us to be. Bob Dylan will die someday. The tape will remain sealed. And that, Maria believes, is exactly how it should be. Not every story needs an ending. Not every confession needs an audience. Some truths are meant to be spoken once, into darkness, and then left alone.